just go through what's happening globally on 5G, where we are, what is it looking like, and how the progress is happening. So I'll cover how the wave of opportunity is there on 5G globally. Some of the use cases, I think that's very, very important for us to understand. What are the real use cases on 5G? What would 5G entail in terms of the capex and investments? Where are the ecosystem in terms of the in terms of the vendors? So I'll talk through that, and then I'll talk through the spectrum requirements on 5G, and then the forecasts globally on 5G, and then we'll touch upon the India story, or where we are in India vis-a-vis 5G. So I think that's what we would do, just for everybody's knowledge and understanding. Okay, just for everybody's understanding and knowledge, what would 5G entail? So 5G is going to deliver speeds up to 25 Gbps. I mean, this is theoretical speeds up to 25 gigabytes per second, as against 4G, which is slated to deliver about 1 gigabytes per second, and 3G, which was 1 Mbps per second. Now, against the real or theoretical speed of 1 Gbps per second, the actual speed which is being delivered globally on 4G is about 17 Mbps per second. And what 5G intends to do is to convert this to a minimum average speed of at least 1 GB per second, which is almost 50 to 60 times of the current speeds being delivered. I think 5G, the biggest advantage of 5G is the latency. So the latency on 5G is going to be just about it would be about 10% of the latency which is there on 4G. Just for everybody's knowledge and understanding, 4G today delivers about 50 milliseconds of latency. This would become virtually zero to about 10 milliseconds, depending upon the networks on 5G, and that really will be one of the reasons why you'll see some of the use cases and the relevance of those use cases. 5G would be able to support huge amount of data volumes. These are almost 1000x of what is currently being planned on 4G or being delivered on 4G. This would be upwards of 10 terabytes of data per second per square kilometer. I think this is just going to be humongous amount of data volumes which are going to be dealt with on 5G. 5G would support a density of terminals, more than 1 million terminals per square kilometer. I think that's which is all connected devices. So, and these are not going to be just connected devices on the handheld, but we'll soon see a lot of the machine-to-machine or sensors are going to be connected through the 5G networks. I think the other part on 5G is, whilst we'll talk about the capex and the cost that is going to be incurred on laying the 5G networks, but the cost of running the 5G network, at least on the energy consumption, are expected to be 1/10 of the current consumptions as were there in 2010, and that's been further going up with 3G and 4G coming in. So I think we would see a fair bit of change, or not fair, but a large bit of change when 5G comes in. Another important element for us to remember is that currently today, globally, we are about 7.9 billion subscribers. Of this, 32% of the subscriber base, and when I say subscribers, these are connected SIMs. 32% of these SIMs are on a 3G network, still using 3G, and about 23% of this base is on 4G. So in spite of 3G being operational, and the first launches of 3G happened in the decade of maybe 20 or 2000s, or maybe earlier than that, and 4G happened in the decade of 2010, the percentage of people who have adapted to 3G and 4G still remains a fraction of the total population. We still have a largest population being on 2.5G, which is almost 45-46%. So 5G is going to be a reality, but it's going to be a reality more towards 2010. I think if I go regionally, there are some regions which are ahead of the curve when it comes to 3G, 4G, and therefore may see a faster adoption of 5G. And then there are some regions which are behind the curve. So if you look at US, about 62% of the connections today are 4G connections, and 29% are 3G connections. As against that, CIS, which includes Russia and Eastern Europe, has got 4G connections of just about 9% and 3G connections of 34%. You'll be surprised, MENA, which is the oil-rich geography that we have, is 6% 4G and 41% 3G. Asia Pac, which is where India really belongs to, is where 3G 4G is almost the same with 26% and 27%. So I think the point I'm trying to make is 5G. As I said, 5G is really going to happen, and it's going to happen globally by 2020. I think to corroborate this, EY just did a survey of CIO CTOs, and we had almost 40 CIO CTOs who represent some of the largest telcos with a market cap, collective market cap of over $1 trillion, and these represented, and these CTOs, or 77% of the CTOs, actually identified that 5G would have the greatest impact on the industry beyond 2020. It is beyond 2020 that you'll see real impact of 5G. Just to quote, 5G is the clear leader for us. There's a lot of discussion about IoT technologies, but they will only transform the networks landscape incrementally. 5G is seen as having the most impact in the next 5 years, but the question marks still persist about the business models and the use cases which are going to come onto 5G. So let me move to the next slide and maybe talk through some of the use cases that we see on 5G. I think 5G is going to be more driven by collaboration. I think there would be a collective collaboration between, or there would be partnerships which would be there between operators, between platform service providers, end use industries or sectors, as well as the equipment vendors, and that's what is going to really drive the use cases on 5G. I think clearly 5G would deliver a lot of enhanced video or mobile broadband, which would be live TV, mobile, which would be video, which would be high definition or high definition quality video. This would be available in dense areas. So you know, your entire cricket stadiums or concerts, when you go to, I'm sure you'll be able to access 5G or access broadband seamlessly, and not only access but also download and upload a lot more videos with 5G happening. Live TV will become a reality on your mobile screen, which currently happens, but you still get some level of latency there, and connectivity is a challenge. I think what 5G would also deliver as a use case is sensors. Or sensor networks, and I think that becomes very relevant for us from an Indian standpoint. I think we've been talking about waste management sensors, we've been talking about parking sensors, we've been talking about a lot of variables, and not just variables which are on our hands, but very soon you will see our shoes having variables, and there would be a chip in everything, or most of the clothes that we wear, there would be a chip, and actually the shoes, when we move to the next step, would tell us whether we should move left, right, or straight. It would tell us where we are getting into a water puddle. So all that would happen with 5G being there, because the data transmission is going to be so fast and so quick. It is just going to be imaginable, the amount of data which would be there. I think the other element, or the other most important use case on 5G that we would see is on virtual reality and augmented reality. I think this is going to really change the way some of the businesses are being done, some of the entertainment which is happening today. So you could actually watch an event sitting in your office virtually live on your personalized screen, which is through the virtual reality, and get the experience as if you're sitting over there and enjoying the concert. In fact, in one of the conferences which I attended lately in Shanghai, I think that virtual reality could also lead to you having a house larger than what you currently have, because you could, through virtual reality, you could actually get a feeling that you're sitting in a 5-bedroom house, even though you can move around only in 2 bedrooms. So that's what 5G could enable you to do. Other than maybe having physical connect with people, everything else could be done through virtual reality, and that would be a big use case from a 5G perspective. I think the other thing that you would see is gaming. I think gaming will get to a next level of definition with with virtual reality coming in and augmented reality coming in, the games would become absolutely real. You would play with people across. So I think it's just going to transform the way the world is connected, and the way the world is going to be connected. Driverless cars, I'll talk about that in a minute. Robotic surgeries, that would become a reality. Distance education, which currently is a reality, but actually become classroom teaching and training through 5G networks would become a reality, and through an interaction, and not just a one-way education. So the one of the biggest use cases of virtual reality is education, or is virtual education. So I think that's all going to be real with 5G. Just having a look at what some of the companies are globally doing, or telcos are globally doing, and as you would see, this is really, as I talked about, this is going to be collaboration. This is going to be partnerships between the three, or between the sector which is going to get affected, the telco operators and the equipment vendors, and you would see that that's going to bring 5G use cases to life. So connected vehicles, I think this is already a reality. We talked about driverless or connected vehicles. This is with ETTelecom, BMW, Ericsson. They've successfully tested the 5G network on connected vehicles. This is running at a speed, or data being transferred at a speed of 3.6 gigabytes per second when the car is moving at 170 kilometers per hour. I mean, this is fascinating. I think the other thing that is really fascinating, which I personally experienced when I was in the Mobile World Congress 2017, was the camera which has been developed by KT. It's a sync camera which makes you feel that you're watching, or you're going through the clip that they created, which was on the Winter Olympics, where you actually go through a race and experience a race across the snow, or through the snow in the Winter Olympics. I mean, it's really, really fascinating. I think those 3 minutes is worth maybe a few $100s, and that's the base case that the companies would make. Robotics is going to become a reality. It has been tested by DT, which is demonstrated industrial robots, again in the Mobile World Congress 2017, which can deliver, or which can have a latency, or get your orders and deliver, react within 8 milliseconds. You won't even know when they react and how they react. So this is all getting into reality from a standpoint of use cases. A lot of work to be done, though, but it is progressing globally within a few geographies. If I move to the next slide, and I think there we are covering what is being currently done within the operator community, and what is being currently, and who's launching what on 5G. So but before I get there, I think just on the standards. So currently there are no 5G standards. The 5G standards are going to come in 2018. They're expected to come in 2018. The 3GPP release 15 is expected at that time. Currently, most of the operators are working on pre-standard launch, and obviously those are going to be hopefully aligned with what comes out with a 3GPP allowance. The spectrum bands that 5G is being launched in is the sub 6 gigahertz band. Most of the launches would happen between 3.4 to 3.9 gigahertz band. In fact, there's a milliwave band as well, which is going to be which is at about 28 to 34 gigahertz band, and US has gone in that direction. Verizon is going to be launching 5G in 2017 as we talk, and Verizon is expected to and Verizon is expected to do that towards not about 2017. I think they are expected to provide about 1 gigabytes per second speed to their subscribers. This is going to be launched in about 11 cities in the US, and that's going to be one of the first few initial launches. Ooredoo in Middle East is looking at launching commercially in 2020. They're going to go through the trials or lab trials in 2018, but commercial launch in 2020. They expect to do anywhere from 1 gigabytes to 10 gigabytes per second. I think, as you would see, AT&T, KT, they're all getting ready to launch commercially between 17. In fact, ETTelecom and KT wanting the Winter Olympics experience to be available on 5G by using the use case of virtual reality. So while you can watch the game with a naked eye, you could also watch the game through virtual reality and experience it much better. Most of the Winter Olympics, as and when they come out by Feb 18. So so the operators are really partnering together, are really working together in order to do the launch. So just to give you a bit of a perspective, there is a lot of operator collaboration which is happening on 5G. AT&T, China Mobile, NTT Docomo, Vodafone Ericsson, Huawei, Keysight, MediaTek, Nokia, Qualcomm, all of them are getting together to make sure that the 5G standards are supported by them. Remember, they're investing a lot of money to do this pre-launch without the release of these standards. So therefore, they're all getting together and making sure that before the standards are released, they're all aligned with such release of these standards. There's also a 5G Automotive Association, 5GAA, which includes a lot of automobile companies like Audi, BMW, with the likes of Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei, Intel, and Qualcomm, and they're really testing and promoting communication solutions, support standardization, accelerate commercial availability and global market penetration of 5G services, specifically which is on the vehicle population. So they would be doing, they are creating something which would address vehicle to everything technology and also make sure that the connected cars or the driverless cars are actually active or are based on the standard which is developed by both automobile companies, equipment, and the operators. So this is 5G is really, maybe to repeat myself, is about collaboration, partnerships between the entire ecosystem players of the industry. It doesn't come cheap, believe me. 5G doesn't come cheap. As we talked about, the kind of investments that are going to be made. In globally, telco is a $1.1 trillion revenue market. I think this is going to grow or has been growing at 1 or 2% globally, as against India in the last 12 months, which has actually seen negative growth. So at least there is a positive growth globally on the telco market. There is almost $300 billion of capex which gets done into the global markets. I think if you would see from the bar chart that is on your screens, the expectation globally is that that we would see an enhanced capex which would come in, and this would go up to about $345 billion from a low of $310 billion, which means a CAGR of 5.5% on the capex side. Not small money, $345 billion, and most of this increment or increase would happen as a result of 5G launches or 5G launches which are expected from the operator community. So there is a lot of money which is going to get deployed on 5G. Japanese operators currently. So let's look at Japan, China, and I'll give some broader perspective on India as well. So Japanese have invested close to $54 billion on the 4G networks, and they're invested or they're planning to invest something like $46 billion on the 5G network. Now, the 5G network is lesser than the 4G network in terms of investment by them as planned, and that's because of the network sharing that they would be able to do and the passive infra sharing that they would be able to do. And this is between SoftBank, KDDI, NTT Docomo. China is planning to invest about $180 billion in the next 7 years on 5G. This is almost 45% to 48% over their 4G investments. 45 to 48% over the 4G investments. I think if I were to draw a parallel in India and considering the spectrum investments which have been made in India on 4G, and assuming that the spectrum bands would be different than what currently are being deployed on 4G, India would need to spend anywhere from $60 to $70 billion on 5G over the next 5 to 7 years if this is going to be a reality. We'll come back to whether India and the Indian operators have that kind of money as a sector to support this level of investment for 5G, and is that going to be a constraint for us to move forward on 5G? We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. But this is what it is from a global standpoint, and what is really important for us to see is that are there going to be enough revenue streams which are going to come from 5G? And if yes, what are those revenue streams? We talked about use cases earlier. Are these use cases going to deliver a significant amount of revenues. Obviously, data speed would not by itself deliver a significant amount of revenues. We've seen that with 3G being launched or 4G being launched. Obviously, there's a shift from voice to data, but we haven't seen globally the market on the revenue side just expanding. I mean, if it's been growing at a CAGR of 1 or 2%, it's not that there is a huge amount of contribution which comes with a changing scenario of investments being made by the telecom companies. So it's very important for us to understand how the economics would undergo a change should and when the 5G would get launched. Europe. Pan-Europe investments are expected to be $500 billion in order to get a full 5G coverage and launch. I mean, as I said, it's just humongous amount that we can not even imagine about. I think if we just quickly have a look at the spectrum situation on 5G, and you know, as I mentioned, 5G would operate on a 3.4 to 4.2 gigahertz. That's the band which is currently being talked about and planned for 5G. Obviously, the higher you go on the band, the more coverage you want, the more capex you would invest. There would be a small cell architecture which would be required for 5G and for the experience of 5G to come in. I think there is a millimeter wave band which is going to provide a better experience in terms of the capacity for 5G, and this is what is being used by the US operators. In fact, Verizon did the acquisition of Straight Path for $3.1 billion to get spectrum in 39 gigahertz band and 28 gigahertz wave band, and that's the place where they're going to launch their first 5G experience in 2017. To date, there have been 2 auctions which have happened globally on 5G, Ireland and Czech Republic. I think which was in 3.6 gigahertz band and 3.7 gigahertz band. I think the important thing is 78 million euros being raised in Ireland, a small country, small amount of money. But what is important to see is in Czech Republic it went to 8.9 million, but 7 times the reserve price. So there was 7 times the reserve price at which the auction was done, and the spectrum which was auctioned in Ireland was about 350 megahertz. So I think the governments would need to prepare themselves as we go along on the 5G auctions, and remember that a lot of operators and the sector as a whole in India and globally has coughed up a few $100 billion towards the auctions on the 4G spectrum. So are we ready really for more and more of 5G spectrum? And is there enough cash in the system to support this auction? We'll come back to the India story on this very soon, as I said. A quick view on the 5G base case or 5G revenue case. So as I mentioned that globally, we are about 7.5, 7.6 billion connection market right now, and this is expected to grow at a CAGR of not more than 1 or 2%. So by 2026 we would be 8.5 billion CAGR market, and connection market, and the estimates are that 5G would be about 1.1 billion of that, which is just about 13 to 14%, or shade about 15% of the overall market. I think that's where we would see that's where we would see 5G coming in. I think the important thing to see on the bottom side of the graph is that a lot of this coverage would be urban coverage. That would be about 45-46%. Hotspot coverage would be about 32%. But full geographical coverage on the early deployments would be very, very limited, and full population coverage would be very limited. So largely, we would see the initial launch of 5G would be in dense urban areas in order to provide the experience of high-speed mobile broadband to the users and support the entire IoT connectivity or machine-to-machine connectivity. So I think that's what we would see. 5G is not going to compete with 4G for sure. As we all know, most of the technologies are complementary to each other. whether it's 2G, 3G, 4G, both, all three of them are existing in various markets, including India. So we won't see any of these technologies being faded out. Obviously, we may see some end of 2G networks in the next few years, and in some markets globally, 2G has come to an end, or 2G has been or there's no further deployments of 2G which is happening. So I think we will see complementing technologies in the market. If I were to just quickly move on to the 5G revenue game. So before that, as I mentioned, that we are a $1.1 trillion kind of a market, expected to grow to $1.3 trillion by 2025, which means over the next 8 to 9 years, at a CAGR of 2.25%. Now, what does it mean from a 5G perspective? So if you're going to add revenues of just $300 billion, and all of them, remember, are not going to come from 5G, with the investments that we talked about on 5G being close to, even if you were to take it $300 billion in a year, and if you were to look at a 3 or 4 year cumulative investments of $1.2 trillion, would that justify, would the increase of revenue justify that? The answer is no, and that's where has to be a change on business models. I think based on some independent studies which have been done, there's an opportunity for the telecom operators to unleash the entire ICT digital portfolio, and that the market there is expected to be $3 trillion by 2026, and the 7 or 8 sectors which can be focused for by the telecom operators could be $1.2 trillion. And even if the telecom operators were to get 50% of that, we could look at a $600 billion as an opportunity size. And if we were to add that to 1.3 trillion dollars, we could actually see a huge amount of growth coming in. Now this revenue increase would actually come for telecom operators if they start playing not just as connectivity providers, or not just as pipes who are providing connectivity, but also providing big service creators by actually participating in developing those services, by providing those, as I mentioned, by actually being one of the people who are defining the use cases, and then collaborating with the multiple players within the sectors to bring those use cases to life, and then owning the data and doing the analytics to actually provide the experience which is required to the customer. So this would mean owning the content as well as the solution, and not just providing connectivity. So if they get to a service creation, service enablement, and network service providers, I think that's the place where the opportunity really lies for the operators globally, if they have to look at 5G on a serious note. And I think, and I touched upon the survey that we did earlier, and there's also a GSMA survey which is available, where I think the biggest concern on 5G deployments is the business case, which would be there. Almost 60% of the CEOs globally believe that the most important element of 5G deployment is having a robust business case for delivering revenues out of 5G. It's not just a replacement technology. It is not just to provide high-speed data experience to the consumers, but it's also to provide multiple use cases to enhance revenues from the B2B business segment and B2C business segment, for them to justify the investments that we talked about on 5G. Let's look at India, and I'm going to spend a few minutes now on India. So I'll spend a few minutes now on India. As we all know, India is a market where currently the sector is more than stressed. I think stress may be an understatement for the sector. If I were to just throw some statistics from an India standpoint, I think year on year the revenues in India have degrown. I think we all know that. India is the margins for the sector have come down. The sector right now on an EBITDA standpoint is less than maybe 20%. Market consolidation has happened, which is good, in a way good for the sector, but the consolidation is coming through distress, which may not be the best thing for the sector. I think the sector debt is almost 450,000 crores or $80 billion, which is fairly high. I remember the sector size right now is about $38-39 billion. So the debt is 2x of revenues. The servicing of the debt becomes very difficult. Fiber on the ground, I think we've been all talking about fiber. For 5G, fiber is a must. We just have 20% of our towers which have been fiberized right now. So the amount of capex which is required for 5G or to start the 5G rollouts, as I mentioned earlier, could be to the tune of $60 to $70 billion. Apart from developing use cases, smart cities is a great use case, but remember, smart cities are anyway being driven through fiberized networks, or the networks have to be fiberized, and the governments are laying down their own fiber for it. So we clearly need to see whether there is enough funding which is available for the industry to start their journey on 5G. And there was a few press articles in the last few weeks where some of the operators are already looking at lab trials on 5G, which is a good development. At least the innovation and the exploration is not stopping from a sector standpoint, but to make it a reality, to make it a real reality, I think it is really important for somebody to fund this sector, for somebody to de-stress this sector, for the debt levels to really come down. Servicing this kind of a debt level itself is out of question. If we were to just do a quick comparison of India with some of the rest of the globe or emerging markets, I mean India has been delivering an ROCE on telecom of less than 5% of the sector. And if I were to look at Indonesia, it's delivered almost 40%. With the largest telco over there, Telecom Indonesia, or China Mobile does it at 28%. AIS is at 27%, Maxis is at 25% return on capital invested or employed. I mean, this is really it just distracts the capital for coming into this market. Debt equity in India, the largest operator in India has a debt equity or debt being almost two times the equity or 3 times the equity. Now somebody could say that 3:1 is a good ratio to have, provided there is enough of interest coverage ratio or debt EBITDA ratio is in control. The way the sector is moving, it's completely out of control. So I think for India, the road to 5G, whilst we talked about the trials or the lab trials or at least the MOUs being signed, I think we are really far away. And as I said, globally, people are looking at 5G or the real start of 5G happening post 2020. I think India may be a couple of years behind. Remember, India has not yet milked 3G as a technology. So coming into 5G, considering that we invested close to $20-25 billion just on spectrum on 3G, and we invested close to about $40-45 billion on 4G. Now, for us to go and move towards 5G, even though these are complementary investments which are going to happen, but there is a complete ecosystem shift which will happen. There is a device ecosystem which will undergo a change. We may see some deployments happening in the early 2020s, and these would be more in the urban areas, maybe more dense urban areas, again depending upon how the government moves towards the auction of spectrum, how they identify the bands which have to be used for 5G, and how they bring that into the licensing, and then what's the reserve price that they keep for the purposes of those bands. So I think we are slightly, I would say that we need first to resolve our current sector crisis, which I think has got a much more looming or gloomy impact on us, and then really head start the 5G the 5G path. And then, at least in our view, we would take at least 3 to 4 years before we see maybe the first commercial launch of 5G. So I would actually bet a 2022 kind of a situation for an India first commercial 5G launch, even though it may be at a smaller place. And if I just compare this to 4G and I compare this to 3G, remember the 3G and 4G auctions first happened in 2020. The first 4G launch actually happened in, maybe soft launches happened in 2014, 2015, when 4G was slightly more evolved at the time of the auctions. 3G was in in 2012, 2030. So 5G, which is where the auctions are not slated right now, is at least 5 years from now. I would say that 5G really is a technology of the 2020 decade. 4G was a technology, 4G and 3G were the technologies for India of the 2010 decade, and with the technology cycles really shortening, I think it's and the debt situation that we have in the market, it is very important for the entire ecosystem within the industry to not jump onto 5G, but actually go and take it as a thought through bet as against deepening their debt levels by another $40–45 billion. So I'm going to stop there. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Singhal. Now we will start with the question and answer session. First question is from Manish Chaudhary. He's asking, how will advent of 5G impact adoption of IoT?
So I think, as I mentioned, 5G is going to accelerate IoT because of the speeds that are involved on 5G, because of the latency, which is minuscule as compared to 4G, and to some extent, I mean, provided there is a fiber backhaul which is available, or there's a backhaul which is available on the wave, we would see a surge on the IoT. So even the 1.1 billion connections that we're talking about, a majority of those connections, or at least 40–50% of those connections, are going to come in 2026 through the IoT network. We talked about connected homes. As one of the use cases, if you just go back to the use case slides that we had, we talked about connected homes. We talked about connected or driverless cars. We talked about waste management. We talked about wearables. So all that is nothing but IoT, because that's all. IoT can be B2B, B2C, but that's nothing but IoT. So I think it is going to accelerate. It is going to accelerate IoT.
Question is from Dhananjay Chaube. What would be the bandwidth required on radio spectrum part for 5G?
So the bandwidth, this is it depends upon the network and the capacity that we put for the network. But globally, what operators are looking at is, I just talked about Czech Republic, Czech Republic actually, and Ireland coming out with almost 350 megahertz of spectrum in the 3.4 to 3.7 gigahertz band. So typically, an operator requirement for 5G and for having a good 5G experience at that band would be, or is expected to be, about 100 megahertz of spectrum that may be required to give an experience of high speed and high speed, and then because of the spectrum band being in that megahertz, you need a lot of passive and active infrastructure network, which is the reason why your cost goes up, and that's the reason why China is expected to incur or invest almost 48–50% of their 4G network. So that's the kind of requirement which would be there. It would be 100 megahertz kind of a requirement for an operator on the 5G network.
Next question from Tina. What kind of revenue growth can Indian telcos expect from 5G?
I hope that we get some revenue growth. We've seen in the last 18 months, we've seen revenues coming down, but that was on a lighter note. I think it really depends upon the collaboration that the Indian telcos do with the industry players or the end user industry players and the equipment vendors to create use cases and therefore take a part of that revenue. If I just have to look at the connectivity revenue growth, I don't think that we will see a big upsurge from 5G. We could see a normal growth, which would be sub 10% year on year with the advent of 5G. But if the Indian operators start playing in actually coming out with the use cases and being owners of those use cases, running the platforms, being the service creators, providing the service, not just connectivity service, but let's say a gaming service or a service which is a virtual reality linked service or augmented reality linked service. Then we could see a much larger pie of revenues which come into that, and that revenue would not just be a connectivity revenue, but that would also be a content or a substance revenue that the operators would get into. So they will start biting into the revenues of let me say digital evolution in the Indian market, and that could be a big upside for the operators. And I would think that they will have to move there, because there is no business case which would support a 5G investment with just pure play connectivity revenues. You have to move. They will have to move there in the next as and when they start developing their 5G plans.
Next question from Shrikant. What will be the optical fiber demand globally and India due to 5G?
I think I can answer this question. I don't have a specific number on the optical fiber in terms of the number of kilometers that would be required, or the strands of fiber that would be required. I can come back on that, but clearly in India there's going to be a huge amount of demand, as we know that there's just 20%. I mentioned that 20% of the fiber connectivity amongst the towers. So whatever is fiber on the ground for connecting the towers, and we in India have got 400,000 towers, which covers most of the part of the country. You can assume that we would need to connect almost 300,000 towers, and most of the connectivity would be through optical fiber. So it's just going to be, the numbers are going to be humongous. I can come back specifically on the exact number of kilometers or 1,000 kilometers offline to you.
Next question from Aditya Saraf. Do MNOs need to revisit their business models to justify investments in 5G, especially for making use of narrowband frequency?
Yeah, clearly, I think the operators would need to revisit their entire proposition. I think we covered that. So they would need to invest, or they would need to think about business models of collaboration, partnerships with multiple stakeholders, depending upon B2B and B2C. They would continue to provide connectivity, but over and above that, for 5G, they will have to look at different set of business models, and I think we talked about it. It could be efficiency-based models for B2B companies. It could be enterprise. They'll have to play a much larger role on the enterprise side of the business for creating those efficiency models. On the B2C, as I mentioned, it's not just playing on connectivity, but adding on to the connectivity layer.
Next question from Preeti. Is 5G technology be launched by BSNL in India?
The 5G technology is not, I mean, BSNL has just signed a MOU for exploring lab trials with Nokia. I think it's too early to say that 5G would be only launched by BSNL, or BSNL would be the first to launch. I think we'll have to wait. I mean, ETTelecom has also announced some kind of an MOU with Nokia, so we'll have to wait and see how this unleashes. It's too early to say who's going to be the first to launch 5G services in India. I think it's just too early.
Next question from Swati. What kind of regulatory challenges India needs to overcome to augment deployment of 5G? Sorry.
Yeah, I think I mean, India right now has got, as we all know, there are enough regulatory challenges which have to be addressed in this market. I think for 5G, one is that the existing regulatory issues should kind of get resolved because of the investments that we are looking at on 5G. More importantly, specifically for 5G, clearly the band on which on 5G which has to be offered has to be identified. The reserve price has to be computed, and remember that India a few years ago was a very different market, which was a 12 operator market. Auctions of spectrum was easy. Easy in the form of demand supply. There was a greater demand than supply. I think we've seen what happened on the 700 megahertz spectrum, which went there were no takers for it, even though the auction had 35 megahertz of that spectrum available. So I think India will need to really get the spectrum roadmap from a regulatory perspective clear. What are the next auctions which are going to happen. When is the 5G auction which is going to happen? How is the reserve price going to be determined? What is the spectrum fees on that reserve price? How would you differentiate between the spectrum usage charge for 5G versus 4G, 3G, 2G, which is now a weighted average methodology which has been adopted. So I think it requires the entire licensing regime may need to be relooked, because as I mentioned, 5G business models are going to be very different. And they would not entail just the revenues coming from connectivity, but they'll also entail revenues coming from other services. And we all know today that the spectrum charges and the revenue share is payable on the revenues being made by a legal entity who's a license holder, as against just the connectivity revenues. So we need to redefine some of those bases as to what constitutes the term revenue. And I think that may also be one of the reasons why the operators are not really collaborating with the other players in the ecosystem to generate a larger, or to innovate and generate a larger amount of revenue pie, because the regulatory environment is not being helpful on that. So I think we need to do that. And of course, the bands of spectrum, the availability of spectrum. Currently, some of these bands are unlicensed spectrum, so getting them into the licensing regimes to clear that up. I think those are the kind of regulatory hurdles that we will have to address from an India standpoint.
Next question from Harishankar Ramamurthy. Do we foresee more merger and acquisitions in India on account of 5G?
I don't think so. 5G, I would think that by the time we get to 5G, we would have completed the consolidation game in India. The way it is progressing, I would not really see more M&A happening as a result of 5G. 5G will not drive M&A. 5G could create more and more of inter-circle or intra-circle roaming arrangements between operators who've got a 5G network versus who've got still a 4G or a 3G network, but will not result into an M&A, or will not drive M&A. Clearly, this would coexist as a service, and we know today there are some operators who don't play in 4G, but they are existing. They have their 3G and 2G coverage, and they are working on the 3G and 2G coverage. So the short answer to the question is that 5G will not drive M&A. I think M&A is driven by is largely driven by the financial stress which is being caused in the market. And remember, India was anyway over. I mean, we've always said that India had number of subscribers which are number of operators which are much larger than the rest of the world. If I were to look at US has got just about 4 operators, which is AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint, and none of the operators is a dominant operator, so they share, the largest share in that market is with AT&T with 32%. So I don't think India will see a drive of M&A through 5G.
Next question is for Sunil. What are the risks involved and how fast will it be implemented?
So the risks on 5G are, and I think I guess this question is more from an India standpoint. I think the risks for 5G are very high. Any kind of technology change requires a huge amount of investment, and the amount of investment here could be anywhere from $40 to $60 billion. The other important thing is change of ecosystem. You need the device ecosystem to come in, as we all know that the end user devices, whether it's machine to machine use devices or handsets, they will all need to be upgraded, or they'll need to be invested for. The entry barrier has to be removed. Today, the launch of a 5G handset, and if I were to do a comparison, 4G was maybe $150, $200, and today a 4G handset is available at sub $100 or sub $80. A lot of investment will have to go. A lot of change in the way people do business will have to be done from a 5G perspective. It is not just about data speed augmentation, as I touched. It is about use case development and getting people to start thinking and working differently from what they've been doing right now. Remember, doing a virtual reality show. So instead of having this webinar, you actually have a You actually have a VR conference where people are able to see each other and do this through their mobile phones, and you connect almost 1,000 people through that. So it's just the different way in which we would need to do business, and that's a cultural shift that we will have, a society shift which we will have to have with 5G coming in. The risks. The risks are very high because of the investments which are going to go in, and the shift and the speed at which we shift culturally and as businesses. And remember, India is not just urban India. India is not people who live in Delhi, Bombay, Chennai, Bangalore. India is tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities. India is rural India. So how would a rural Indian change the way he does business? How would a rural Indian change the way he lives his life? And how does technology plays an important role in his life is going to drive the change and is going to be determinant of the success of 5G in this market. And it's not just going to be an urban phenomenon. It may start with an urban phenomenon, but to justify the investments and to get to sweat the assets and to milk that investment, it has to be a mass service and a mass product, and there would be mass use cases which will have to be developed, adopted. So to answer the question, it is very risky and would require a lot more thought process than just a shift from 2G to 3G to 4G. Remember, 2G to 3G to 4G, 4G and 3G, the biggest use cases is content, is video, is television, and I think that's very easy for people to go get hooked on to. And today, when we use when we watch YouTube or when we watch live TV, the live TV has got a latency, and we could get we could see that, or we could feel that, not see that, but we could even feel that. But remember, would you pay a premium to just get that latency low? And the answer is no. You may not end up paying a premium, and the YouTube speed of download, whether it is if it becomes 20 seconds lesser than what it takes right now, would you be willing to pay something which is double the data speed charge? I know that is the lowest today in India. It's less than 6 paisa MB, which is the lowest in the world, and I'm sure people will not be willing to mind paying 12 paisa per MB, but I don't think that the cost or the price is going to remain the same. So I think there is going to be a big shift which will be required, as I said, in the way we do business to justify any kind of 5G investments and to cover the risks of financial investment in 5G.
Next question from Sunil again. How would 5G help in building smart cities, as most of its features are for development of infrastructure in industries?
So I think 5G is about access. I would say that in clearly on smart cities, because smart cities are based on a lot more of machine-to-machine IoT. I talked about the waste management, sensors. I talked about parking sensors. I talked about basically the entire machine-to-machine communication can be much better with 5G, and surveillance, capturing mobile live videos. All that is possible with 5G, and clearly is going to be a big contributor to the smart cities. But today, none of these smart city bids have factored in the cost of 5G deployment. So whilst it could accelerate, the cost and the outlay that the government has planned for 5G could just multiply exponentially if you were to add 5G to it. I mean, it wouldn't be the same, for the first, I think, 100 cities, the 11,000, 12,000 crores will just multiply a few times for it to be relevant. So, use case, yes, it would accelerate smart city deployment, would provide greater experience, faster communication, faster data availability, faster analytics, but at a price, and that is not yet factored. So we need to see, and whilst the smart cities are going to be up and running, and they're, as we talk, they are already getting up and running in the next couple of years. 5G is more like 2022 kind of a time frame. So we would see 5G getting fitted into the smart cities to provide a greater experience and greater data coverage with lower latency, maybe over the next, not over, but after 4 or 5 years or so, and could further augment or accelerate the smart city deployment.
Next question from Kiran Bhatia. You mentioned that operators have not fully been able to utilize the 3G and 4G network. What is stopping operators from completely milking the current 3G and 4G network?
Yeah, I think it's not. So yes, the operators have not been able to utilize that, but I won't say that it's really the operators. It's the ecosystem. So in India today, still 50% of the phones which are sold, new handsets which are sold or devices which are sold, are feature phones. We are today less than 30% smartphone penetrated market. So for us to be milk the 3G and the 4G network, or milk the 3G and 4G assets, the entire ecosystem or device ecosystem has to change. The devices have to be 4G and 3G enabled. Smartphone penetration has to go up. The prices has to come down. The adoption rates have to go faster. And what I mean by prices, it's the device prices. Currently, the price of data is as we know, is the lowest in the world. 6 paisa per MB is nowhere else in the world, and that's what has taken India as the highest data consumer in the world today. So there is been a lot of data surge or data usage surge in the last 12 to 18 months. I think in terms of the utilization, in terms of the network capacity utilization, may not be contributing to the revenue and to the profitability. In fact, not contributing to the revenue at all, and having a depletion of the profitability. So I think it's more about an ecosystem, and it takes time. So you can't. It's not that a technology gets launched and within 2 years or 3 years, by pulling the plug, the technology is well accepted everywhere, and the technology completely changes the market. As I gave the first set of data, which was globally today, we are just about 55% between 3G and 4G connections on the global network, and there's still 45% of connections which are 2G. And I also went through different markets to give you a comparison of where different markets are, like US on a 67% 4G connections, as against Middle East, which is a single digit, or CIS, which is a single digit 4G connections. So I think it just takes time as an evolution. And as I said, it's about educating the consumers. It's about making sure that the devices are available. That's not within the control of the telecom operators, but that's more in control of the device manufacturers. I think what is really in control of the telecom operators is coverage, and I think they've done most of the coverage. 3G is now population coverage and geography coverage would be close to 90% plus. 4G would be in the late 70s or 80s. I think they've done that. I think they've come out with plans which are lucrative, which kind of put the rates the lowest. So now it's more about the adaptation of the ecosystem to go and pick up those and experience the 4G and 3G difference, and then to get signed up. So I would give it another 3 to 4 years where we would see a lot of surge on 3G and 4G business.
Next question from Amiras Patel. Do you think 5G infrastructure setup will be major challenge in India due to ongoing finance woes for operators?
Yeah, I did touch upon it. I think today's scenario is, and today's scenario with the kind of debt that we are sitting on the sector, the answer is a big yes in capital letters. And unless we come out of the financial stress that the sector is in, I think taking more investment funds and to the tune of 40 to 50 billion dollars as a sector may be very difficult. Maybe one or two operators may be able to take it, but it's going to be very difficult today to commit that kind of money. And when I say today, even in the next 2 or 3 years, unless we see a complete drastic change in the way the sector is operating.
So we will be taking last question for today. This is from Mr. Sanjay Srivastav. How much do you think would be proportion of data-driven versus IoT-driven adoption of 5G in India?
Yeah, so I would say that this question again is like blue sky because India is going to come in and let's see, 5G would be in 2020 to 2023. So I would say that by that time, India would be a 70% data market, 30% voice market. IoT would drive, and it's not about data driven and IoT driven. I would say that how much of the proportion would be retail consumer data usage and how much would be a machine to machine IoT usage. I would think that 5G would see 5G would see a larger portion of their revenues coming from IoT or machine to machine, and that's where the real use cases lie as compared to just a connectivity speed from a consumer experience perspective. I think a consumer experience perspective, if we are able to deliver the 4G speeds which are being promised world over. Remember, India currently is delivering just about 5 megabytes per second, and the capacity they can go 3 times of that to get to the world average of 70. Now, if we are able to get there, or if we are even able to get to 1 Gbps, which is the theoretical speed of 4G, I think to get to a 25 Gbps will not be a requirement from an Indian consumer perspective. So you could see that 60 to 70%, maybe 80% of the revenues coming from 5G as a result of the machine-to-machine or connected devices use cases and businesses. And that's the kind of revenue we could get from the 5G use cases, and which is the reason why, as I mentioned, it's very important to collaborate, create a driverless connected cars, and I touched upon the machine-to-machine use cases earlier as well.